Hey everyone, this is Manifold Garden Development Update number 16. In this video, I'm going to go over recent visual improvements, discuss the music system, and talk about design. Last month, we updated the graphics system to address some ongoing issues with shadows. For a long time, we have had these weird bugs with shadows where the shadow moves with the player and random sources of light appear. This update was meant to address that. However, it was a pretty significant change, and initially it broke several other visual effects. It took a while to track down all the problems and fix them, but the good news is we have fixed all of them now, and the current system is overall better than the old one. Another visual that we improved is the look of these black hole boxes. They were supposed to represent a kind of corruption in the world, but they were breaking the world wrapping illusion. As you know, a major mechanic in Manifold Garden is that the world wraps around on itself. To achieve this effect, what we do is place duplicate versions of the world around the main one. You can see that we have multiple instances of the same world. Now, these duplicates have lower level of detail, and we do things like removing faces that players can't see, replacing windows with a textured quad, and just straight up not rendering the instances in the corners because they're too far away to be visible. The play area is defined in a box, and when the player reaches one face of the box, we teleport them to the other side. It's simple in theory, but the key is you have to make it look seamless. There are also complications with physics and audio, but that's a topic for another video. Anyway, these black hole boxes were causing a slight hiccup when you were world wrapping. You could see them pop in at the edge of the screen. And so you know that is the precise moment when the player got teleported. It kind of takes away the illusion. What was going on here was that the colors were not having fog applied. So all the other materials in the scene appeared as well, but because of the fog, they appeared very smoothly. So the first thing we did was we had fog applied to these black hole boxes, but the problem was that the material colors actually fade out before the edges do. So, while the fog applies to the materials in the scene, it does not apply to the edges. It's not immediately obvious, but the edges and the surface colors actually fade out at different rates. Notice that the color of the floor fades to the background color while the edges are still black. The edges don't fade out until much further away. This contributes a lot to the look of Manifold Garden, and it is intentional. However, this means that black materials turn gray while the edges are still dark. So the problem with having the black hole boxes fade out early is that it just looks weird. They're supposed to represent corruption. We named them after black holes. They're supposed to be the darkest material in the world, but they just don't look that way. So Arthur, who's been the main architect of the graphic system, ended up applying a different fade to the black hole material. Now it actually fades out slower than the lines. It's very subtle, but this means in the distance, they actually appear slightly darker than the edges. It's as if they're darker than black, which is pretty cool. Another major improvement we did recently is the edge detection effect for the PS4 version. I can't go into detail, but there were some issues that resulted in the edges on the PS4 version looking really bad, especially compared to the PC version. If you look closely, you could see the edges sort of disintegrate in the distance. This by itself wasn't so noticeable, especially if you were sitting on a couch, but it created this really bad moire effect overall. Anyway, Arthur went down a rabbit hole looking for a fix and finally solved it. This is what it looks like now. You can see the edges disintegration is all gone, and the PS4 version looks really, really good. We recently redid the music system in Manifold Garden. There has been a very basic music system in the game for a while now, but most of its functionality was extremely limited as it was based purely on trigger areas, and it lacked persistence. The code was also very messy and hard to use since it was implemented initially just to get the music working and wasn't really designed for an end-all solution. For a 3D game like Manifold Garden, where levels are connected to one another seamlessly and players can backtrack, music can actually be pretty complicated. For example, in this scene, when the player walks in, there's a stinger that plays to highlight the visual. We only want this music to play the first time the player walks in because it's meant to be a very cinematic and epic moment. So what happens if the player returns to this area later? If you played the music every time the player walked in, that's a little bit much. Likewise, there are moments where a piece of music starts with one action and then ends with another. For example, when the player walks into this room, we start the music, or one part of the music, and then when they get outside, the second sequence starts. Then finally, when they switch on the laser, the last sequence plays. At any one point, though, the player could choose to stop and go somewhere else, and that's something we have to take into account. We redid the system to make it handle such cases a bit easier. In the old system, all the music sound emitters were created when the game started, and they were all managed by one single script. This meant that all the unique logic and special features for the different levels were all crammed into one place. The new system has each area's behavior separated into their own managers, which makes everything a lot more organized. All of these managers extend from a single base class called Music Tracker Group. This class is, as the name implies, a group of music trackers. Each music tracker is responsible for managing a single FMOD sound event for the music, how to fade it in and out, and how to manage the parameters, as well as saving or loading data from the save file as needed. Now, we do have a default behavior for music that we can use if a level doesn't need anything special, and the way that works is if a piece of music is assigned to a level and uses the default behavior, then when the player enters the scene, it fades out the last music, fades in the new one with a bit of overlap, and when the player leaves the level, then it starts to fade out. So it doesn't just cut off music abruptly. It works fine, but we actually try not to use this default behavior too much. And the reason is that while the game spaces are broken down into different scenes, we do want the players to feel like everything is connected and everything is seamless. So the spaces are meant to connect, and it wouldn't make sense if every time you were in a new area, a new piece of music played. Internally, we have this idea of the music sentence, where a piece of music might begin in one scene and then continue throughout other scenes, so it creates and enforces a sense of connection between the spaces. It's a sentence that spans across multiple scenes. The other day, I got a message regarding something I said in one of the earlier development update videos. I'd said that I streamlined the game and made it less complex, and the person that messaged me was concerned that this had made the game too easy. I want to take a few minutes to clarify my statement and put any concerns to rest. There's obviously a very wide spectrum of complexity and difficulty in a game, and there's a very diverse range of players out there. Now, games are interactive, so as a designer, you are trying to account for different reactions and different play styles, and the key for me is to accommodate as many people as you can while staying true to your vision, right? I think that the last part is really important. You don't want to dilute the core experience of the game. Now, it wasn't like previously we had a great game and then a bunch of people played it, found it too hard, and I just took out all the hard puzzles. There were some serious design issues with the older version of Manifold Garden, older versions, actually. The game is always changing and I'm always iterating. There's a big difference in how you get stuck in a game. If you're solving a good puzzle and you need a minute to think through it, but you're engaged, that's a good kind of stuck, right? You're stuck for a minute and then it all clicks. That's cool. But if the game is unfair or confusing and you're getting frustrated, that's a bad kind of getting stuck. So here's an example from an earlier version of Manifold Garden. We had this space that the player could stumble into early on, which became useful later. And my thinking was that hey, it's kind of cool to peek at this space, be a bit confused, and come back later and have it all click. The problem was it didn't actually work out like that. It was presented like the next space for you to go, and there was nothing to say that you weren't ready for it yet. There was kind of no foreshadowing of its importance later. Maybe that would have been okay if the room was small, but the problem was the room was actually quite confusing, and if you try to explore, if you gravity change, you immediately got stuck. There were all these doors. It wasn't easy to tell which one you came from. We also hadn't told the player at this point that they could backtrack. Like, up until this point, the game was all forward progression, and now the player is put in a confusing space. They're looking for like the next door to go to, and so we're asking them to do something that they've never had to do. And a lot of players, based on our observations, based on playtests, a lot of players just spent a ton of time wandering around aimlessly and got frustrated. Now, maybe you could argue that this is a part of the game. This is just sort of the nature of Manifold Garden. There's some frustration involved with the puzzle game. But to me, we are putting the player in a position to do something they're just not ready for. This is not the kind of experience I want players to have. I want players to get stuck on a puzzle and then have an aha moment when they solve it. Here, players are stuck because I made something confusing. It's not a good puzzle. There's no aha moment. There's no big concept. It's just bad design. And I think that comes across as unfair. When I said we streamlined the game, this is the kind of stuff I was talking about. We removed the roadblocks that aren't interesting, that were confusing and tedious, so that players could experience the good parts. A friend of mine played an earlier version of the game, and afterwards he said to me that there were some really great parts, there were some incredible moments in the game, but there was also a lot of tedious moments, a lot of times where he was just stuck and confused for no good reason. Like there wasn't a good payoff at the end of that. And so what we're doing is minimizing those while maximizing the good parts, the parts that are actually in line with the core vision of the game. That's it for this time. As you can see, we're making progress and we're moving forward. If you want to stay up to date, we have a mailing list you can sign up for. You can also subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'm on Twitter. We have a Discord. I also stream development almost daily. And don't forget, you can wishlist the game on Steam now. All the links can be found in the video description below. Thank you for your support. I will see you around.